So we create the time period column, which I have already created here in the interlude. And basically, that's just another go to the add column, create it as a custom column. And then, of course, it will ask you if you would like to insert it there, for instance, and then you type it into this space over here. I'm just going to cancel that, and I'm just going to right click on this and say edit settings, and it's just the formula. So that time period formula says, right, if the hour of the day is greater than or equal to 6 and hour of day is less than 10, then classify that time period as morning peak. Okay, else if hour of day is greater than or equal to 10 and hour of day is less than 16, then off peak, and so forth. Of course, we write it in here because using the wizard, we cannot extend with the, unless we'll have to do each line and sort of like breaking the boundaries at, okay, 6, and then do one for less than 10, and then do one for greater than or equal to 10, and do one for less than 16, and just categorizing these hours that way. But it's much more performant to write some code in here and create this custom column like so. Okay, so I'll say if hour of day greater than or equal to 1600 and hour of day is less than 1900, then evening peak. Else everything else is classified either night or the morning. Okay, so we capture that logic that way, and we say okay, we have that time period column over there. And then we also do another one for the service status. So the service status is a pretty straightforward one, just because it's just you don't need the and actually in there. So you can go back into the wizard and you can create the service status for each of those services there. If canceled flag equals true, output it is canceled. Right time flag equals true, it's right time. If the to 3 flag is true within 3 minutes, to 5 flag within 5 minutes. Else, just classify it as late, so over 5 minutes. Okay, and that's how you build that service status column. Okay, so once we've done that service status column, now let's try and bring in the rest of our data sets so we can start to build the data model that we will then push into Power BI. Okay, so we're still doing this in Power Query. Okay, so go to the home button or the home tab even, and we select the new source drop down list there, text CSV. I'll bring in the next facts table, the delay attribution, those services, bring those in there. In a short while, that will come up on the screen. You kind of see the preview. Okay, yep, everything looks absolutely fine. I'm just going to accept that. And of course, when I was set to that, I can have just quick look and say, all right, okay, yep, that makes sense. Text type, cause or category, yes. Minutes, okay, that's a number. Fantastic. Okay, so I'm good with that. Let's bring in the next data set. Again, you can pull all of these data sets as much as you would like. Of course, you don't want to bloat the report itself over time. And as we go in further sessions, we're going to talk about some of these performance enhancing techniques that you might be able to employ as you build these reports. So next, we're going to bring in our train operators. Okay, the company. We'll pull that in again, and this comes in. We'll have a look at that. Again, we can already start to see a bit of an issue there where the column titles are not captured, but that's okay. We have ways to deal with that. So it's all been thought about in the development of this tool. So again, we have a look at it there, and we see there the column titles are actually on the first row of the table itself, or the query, if you like to call it that. So again, very, very easily, we go to use first row as header over there in the drop down, select that first option, and it promotes that first row to the headers. And that becomes the operating company and the associated name of the operating company. Okay, so we've done that. Let us bring in the station dimensions again. So bring the station dimensions in that pops up shortly as it loads. We can already see there's a similar issue there, and for whatever reason, this can happen. I always advise that if you're going to try and bring tables into Power BI, say from Excel sheets and things like that, if you can, make them tables first of all in Excel before you pull them in or you can do some of that work in terms of tidying it and organizing it the way that you want it to. Okay, but you can still do these things in here. So yeah, doesn't really matter. Again, we're going to promote these headers. Use first row as headers, and fantastic. Just look at the data types. Okay, text, fabulous. Again, we'll just go in. And what do we need to bring in now? We need to bring our date dimension. So we'll bring in our date dimension, and we're going to have to analyze all of this information, all of this data on a temporal basis, tempus, i.e. time basis. All right, so we've brought that all in. All our data is sitting in there. This will be a fantastic time then for us to now say, okay, we are going to close and apply. And we'll do that. All of that gets loaded up into Power BI, as you see, like so. Already, okay, well, we default back to our report view here. And you can see there on the data panel to the right, we have the dates in, we have our delay attributions stationed in, we have our stock calls, which can expand each one of them. You can see there with all of the helper columns that we created in the transformation stage within Power Query. Okay, fantastic. We can go to the table view here on the left-hand side, navigation panel, and you can kind of look at the data as well in there, just from a perspective of looking at, also if you're looking at an Excel sheet even. Okay, and of course on the third row down here you have your data model, and it's very intelligent in the sense that once you upload the data into Power BI from Power Query, this semantic model, there is some intelligence built in where it already starts to make connections, right? Understand the semantics between the data. So for instance, once it comes in here, it's basically remembering an old pattern that I had created, but this is what you call a star schema. So when you load this up the first time, it might all be sort of like bunched up or almost overlaid onto each other and stuff like that. And then, you can kind of like just hold and drag and reorganize things along this page here. So I like to put my dates dimension just there on the left. This is the stop calls fact table I've worked on. If we highlight this connection here, you can already see Power BI already sensed that the station code in the station dimension table and station code in the stop calls facts table are exactly the same, and it makes that connection between them. So it means now we can slice this facts table. We can slice the facts table on the basis of that dimension over there. And so is the case for our train operating companies way. Okay, so that's the model. We can create multiple models from different functions within an organization. We can create one for HR, we can create one for finance, we can create one for purchasing, and so forth. Okay, and you just a simple double click, you can always rename them like so. And all of these departments are creating data, the generating data that feeds into the business logic of the organization. So we can actually create the semantic models for all of them there. Okay. All right. Fantastic. So having done that, let's go back to our report page. Don't forget to save. Let's save your work. Go back to the report page and let's start to have a look at some basic visualizations that we can create all of this data that we have got. Yeah. So now we're going to take a quick look at some of the visualization possibilities that are available to us in Power BI now that we have brought in all of these data tables into Power BI via Power Query. Of course, by way of recapping, we always want to make sure when we pull in data, we are handling our null values, so we can try to either replace them with something logical, or we can try and interpret them using a helper column, just to make sure that we understand why they're there. Some sort of standardization is important. We can look at validation timestamps and things like that. So we're needing test data if we have test data within the system. Again, these are things that we can explore in more depth in future sessions. But right now, let's just have a quick look. Some of the visualizations, some essential maybe performance visualizations that we might think are relevant in this use case. So let's start by creating a page. We can create a page here for punctuality trend. So punctuality trends over time. Okay. We can create another one, and that will capture, you say, TLC performance. We can perhaps build one where we are looking at regional performance. Then that might be important. We might also want to say look at some peak time analysis, for instance. Okay. Again, of course, we need KPIs always. So we could have one where we look at some sort of KPIs, time performance, average delay minutes, and things of that nature. So the first example I'd like to show you can make a very, very simple sort of line chart, or maybe a line in a stacked column chart, for instance, or a line in a clustered column chart, and then depending on what it is you want to show on there. Of course, line charts show you trends over time, so we could select a simple line chart and probably I'll automatically create an empty, a blank chart for you there. So we select our service date onto the x-axis. First, we have a drop down here. That's just because it's showing us the date hierarchy. Just want the service date itself to be captured. I might want to look at the average of delay minutes all the time. Okay, and I can sort of capture that way. I can go to the drop down on there and I can say I would like to see the average throughout that entire period. Okay, and this kind of shows me some sort of performance trends. Look for seasonal pattern, something here, something in this region. Why is that? I might be curious about that, for instance. Okay, so that's how you would make a very, very simple line chart in Power BI. Let's go quickly to the next page. We might want to look at train operator company performances. Something that you can use for this particular visualization might be something like a clustered column chart, for instance, a stacked column chart. Let's go with a clustered column chart. As you can see there, obviously, if you hover over the visualization, to tell you exactly which visualization that you're working with and stuff, or you can just look at it and recognize which one it is. It could be a slicer, for instance, it could be a table, could be some sort of matrix, and so on and so forth. Of course, you can also actually build visualizations with actual Python code. Again, this is for a future session. I will commit into that. So right now we've got our clustered column chart on the axis. Might want to, of course, know the TLC name itself. Okay, so we'll go to the TLC dimension over there, and we say, okay, we want to know what those companies are. Okay. The values that would then go into apply would be things like, again, average delay minutes. Probably something interesting to look at. You said we want to see the averages, please. Again, we can expand that a little bit just to make it a bit more, make the visuals a bit more clearer. We might want to look at time performance and so on and so forth. So we could say our right time flags as well. Well, everything's true on here, and so on and so forth. Could be service status as well. Again, it depends on the level of granularity that you want to show. As you can see, we can create some interesting charts on this basis. I'm just going to remove that for now and leave that like so. So again, that's another example of a very, very basic visualization. I can start to tell you something interesting about what's going on in your data. You can always go to the edit in terms of formatting your visual over here real quick, and you could turn on the data labels. Okay, it just puts those values there and allows you to see exactly what those mean. We can go into the general tab here, and this is something that I like to do when I create dashboards. We can go to the effects tab here, and you can give it a visual border. Okay, as you can see, if you do that, basically it can disappear off the screen, and if you're trying to create other visualizations, that might be an issue. I can just go into the general tab, effects. You can turn on the visual board. You can add a shadow for it to look lost on the screen, for instance, and so forth. Okay, we'll come back to these aesthetics later on. Let's say, what about peak time analysis? Peak time analysis, maybe we might want to take a stacked bar chart of some kind. So let's use the I'll use the clustered bar, simple stacked bar chart. And on this, I might want to put in the time periods. So I might select time periods, and again, the time period, I might want to look at services, performance band, for instance. So that might be something useful for us. And also I want to apply a performance band. So if I put in my performance band in over there, I can put in the service ideas. It will be a lot to put in. This makes more sense. And I can kind of just have a quick look at performances. Out of performance band. I apply right time frame as well. I can also apply right time if I wanted to do over that. It depends on the level of complexity that you want to apply. Service status, it makes sense. I can have a look there, and you can just visually see what is going on in the data in terms of what's taking the most, what's causing the most, where you're having the most problems that you might want to investigate further. In terms of KPIs typically you would have them on cards. You tend to create some cards and you just apply those KPIs on them. How do you make cards in Power BI? That icon over there is a card. You have two different types of cards. You have the singular cards and you have the cards where they are multi, depending on how you want to design or your report. If we look at a normal card like so, I tend to create the card that I would like, and then I'll just copy and paste so that I can maintain consistency. I might want to look at average delay minutes, for instance, on there. Okay, I'd like average, please. Thank you very much. I've got the average of my delay minutes over there. And then what I might do is I would then format this visual. I go to the callout value. I might make this a 30 just to make it fit better. Of there, the category label, maybe I might make that 8, for instance, and might make it bold so that it stands out. Also, perhaps 10. That looks all right. And what I would do is I would create this card. I might want to make that bold as well. It pops off the screen. I give it a slightly different color. Another thing you might want to do there while you're here is put on the visual border. You could extend that visual border as well and sort of like maybe around the edges. I tend to like it about 3 or 5. It just depends on how you want to design it. Okay. Now, once I've done that, I've got this card over here and I can simply go Control C on my keyboard and Control V as many times as I like. That just means that there is a consistency in the design and then I don't have to go in and do them all individually. That would take forever. It just does not make sense. Measure twice, cut once type of thing, or do everything right on one and then you can just copy and paste that. Of course, you might put some other measures and you have to tweak something, and that's fine. Generally, for making KPI cards, I try to keep them consistent. I've done that first one. I can literally just go to the next one then, and all I need to do is go into the field and just change what it is that I am putting on there. And I might want to say, let us select services. If I wanted to do a count of services, I know how many services I've captured, right, across the whole network within that time, within a particular time period. And if you put in a quick slicer in here, just to give it some context for you, I can create that slicer. And as you can see, it just puts in a slicer on there. And if I went in and I selected the states into that, you can see what happens there. It gives me this slicer over here that starts from the earliest service date to the last service date. What I would do is anytime I change that time period, as you can see within that time period, there were 5,352 services and so on. You can already start to see how you're getting some sort of insight as to what is going on operationally within your business and so on and so forth. I'm just going to put that up there like so. Just leave that for now. Let's go over here. What other metrics could I put on here? I might want to say, let's look at the cancellations first. Just selected that. And I want to look at cancellations. I can drag that and just put that in there. I've got 28.6. It's just counting everything as canceled. That's clearly not the case. Remember, this is all just synthetic data. This is not representative of an actual, real default. We're just using this as a toy data set to try and explore Power BI. run. In fact, what these values actually show are just some sort of validation, really, of the data that we've brought into the model. And this tells you basically how many items actually have a cancelled. To be honest, in hindsight, maybe I might call this something else, like cancellations, for instance, or cancellation category or something like that. So again, this is knowledge. Okay, this is essentially knowledge in the context of taking data through to insight. So again, you take raw data, you do some transformation to it, it becomes knowledge. Okay, and it is from that knowledge that you then generate insights. We'll come back later on to put in some actual KPIs in here. And this is where we introduce the power of the DAX measure. DAX spelled DAX, Delta Alpha X-ray, also known as data analysis expressions. Okay, and this is where the true power of generating insights from your data comes through in using Power BI. So we're going to create some DAX measures, look at some essential measures, and then go on from there. So let's say one of the first measures that we might want to calculate will be within the context of the stop calls. So we want to create measures. Again, make sure you're working within the actual table of interest. Okay, so we want to create measures based on our stop calls, theory, table, data set that we brought into the system. And all we would do there is, while that is selected, you could literally go to the top there and say, I want to create a new measure. And what that would do, as you can see, it adds that measure over there. And of course, you now need to put in your calculation for your measure in this equation bar here. So the first measure that we're going to put here is, let's say we want to see what our right time performance percentage is. Right time performance percentage, and that is equal to, if you hold down the Alt key and hit enter, it kind of works like a cell in Excel. So if you hit enter, it will accept the equation. So we're not ready to do that. We want to write out what the equation is. So we hold Alt down and enter. It goes to the next line, like so. Okay, we want this to be a divide. If you hit the tab button on your keyboard, it auto completes that for you. It opens it up just much like how it would operate in Excel, for instance, for an Excel equation. So this is what this DAX measure is going to look like. We're going to say that we open that bracket. Let's go to a new line, and we want to count rows. We want to count rows, and again, as you can see, these Excel type statements are coming into play. We want to apply a filter on our stop calls fact table, and we want to pull the stop calls right time flag. So again, if we just go down there and just tap on your keyboard, it will put that in there for you. And we say we want a situation where it is true, okay, where it is true in the table, like so. And we want to close that. You will notice that the first bracket is still red, so you know it's not totally unhappy yet. That's how it comes up in dark mode. It might look slightly different if you're working light mode on your machine. And now, as you can see, that has been closed properly, so it's now purple. Okay, I'm then going to put the next argument or the next thing that I want. Alt enter again to a new line, and I'm just going to count rows on the basis of the stop calls. Okay, so that's how that calculation is going to work. Else it's 0, and basically I want all of that to be calculated and multiplied by 100, just allowed it to be a percentage. Okay, I can click the green button there to commit and accept measure, or I can hit enter, whichever one you like. Okay, so we'll just do that, and we have this measure there of right time performance. Okay, we're going to do the same thing again while we're in the stop calls. The second way that you can create a measure is you can just right click while you're there and just select new measure from the top over there. Okay, and you can come back in here and you give your measure a title, average delay minutes in this case, and this will be equal to simple average formula for stop calls, and we want the delay minutes. So just use the delay minutes that we computed because I know that takes care of all of my potential null and value implications in the data set. So I'm just going to accept that and just close that. Everything is fine. Hit enter, and you've got that measure over there. All right, let's create another measure real quick. Again, we'll just go through and create some of these measures that allows us to generate insights about our operation. We want to know what total services. Total services are just another count rows again. Count rows of stop calls. Okay, nice and simple. That's all. Okay. We'll do another one where we want to calculate the cancellation rate as a percentage. That's something useful for us. Again, we want to divide, and then what we want to do a count rows even with a filter on the stop calls table, and we want to do where stop calls cancelled flag, okay, is true. So the stop call cancelled flag there again is going to be true in this case, and then we'll close that, and we say after we've done that, we want to do it basically as a percentage of everything in the stop calls table. Okay. So again, I'm just tabbing to accept it, else just return 0. Okay, multiplied by 100. Okay, and that's that again, and there we go. Okay, so we've got these measures that we've created, and again you will see them as calculators in there within the table, so you just know those measures that have been calculated on the basis of columns within your data. If we wanted to sort of look at things like time-based analysis, so some time-based analysis might be something that we can calculate on the basis of our base dimension. So on the basis of this, let's create a measure. We say this is going to be the measure of yesterday write time. Again, if you wanted to look back just 1 day, for instance, you would have this as a calculation of write time performance percentage, which we calculated earlier. So again, we're using an already calculated measure to create another measure. And comma, what we're going to do is we're going to do a date add, and we want to go to our date dim or date dimension table. Actually, let's pull the date from it. Okay, date, and you guessed it, we want to go back 1. We want it to be on the basis of day by day search. We close that once, we close that twice, everything is happy. Hit enter on the keyboard, and you have created a write time measure, just like so. Okay, we can also, a very powerful one that we can do is, let's jump back into the stop calls. We can create a new measure here again, and let's say this is the weekly performance trend. Okay, weekly performance trend is equal to, then alt enter into a new line, and you want to calculate the write time performance, okay, that you've calculated before, and you want to do it on the basis of dates in a period. We want to get dimension, the date part of our date table, and let's get the max value of our dates in date. Okay, again, cover the full timeline of the last 7 days, day by day. All right, so again, you can kind of read these equations like a sentence to sense check the logic of what is going on. I'm just going to maybe put this on a new line just so that it's easier to read. Again, actually, we'll do that as well into a new line just to make the whole thing easier for human comprehension. I will just compute that, okay, commit that even, and we have these measures. Again, we can literally this is another one on the basis of already calculated measures. We can create another measure where we just want to know performance versus yesterday. Okay, if you just wanted to just look at performance versus yesterday, that would be your right time performance percentage, which you calculated from the yesterday right time percentage. Nice and simple. And you've got the new measure there. Okay. Again, there are other sort of metrics that we can kind of like look at efficiencies, for instance. Maybe we could say, for instance, let's create a measure for ppm, also known as spell that, performance measure. And you'll see that the measure will come up in a different color, but don't worry, it kind of works a bit like SQL. There are some keywords that are reserved because that's a keyword for calculations, right? But the algorithm or the kernel that runs the whole Power BI ecosystem is context aware. So even though it's a keyword, once you've put the equal to sign, then it knows, okay, you're not trying to use it as a keyword there. You're trying to use it within the context of creating a measure equation. So in this case, we want to divide the count rows, and of course we want to filter. You guessed it again, our facts table, our stop calls, facts of the operations. We want to filter the stop calls right time flag. Okay, so we want to filter the right time flag where the right time flag was true. Okay, and also then want to type also stop call to 5 flag. Well, there we go. Stop call to 5 flag where that was also true. So we close that, and then we say once we've done that, we then want to count rows on the basis of filtering the stop calls table again, and relative to the stop calls cancel flag, where the cancel flag is in this case false. Left these as, if you had left these as ones and zeros, again you'll use the corresponding number. Else just return 0, and you can then multiply that output by 100. So it's some public performance measure. All right, and we say okay. So now that we have all of those measures, then we can start to use that in a real sense in terms of trying to see, basically tell a story about the data, tell a story about the operations, and what that might mean for us.